I'm Todd Johnson, and this is Earlylands in Conversation. Our guest today is Geordin Hill-Lewis, the mayor of one of the world's great cities, Cape Town. Geordin is only 38 years old, yet has already had a highly successful career as a member of South Africa's parliament for the official opposition Democratic Alliance, and since 2021 as Cape Town's mayor. The Financial Times noted in 2024 that as many of South Africa's cities, including Johannesburg, have fallen apart, Cape Town has gained a reputation for economic growth and improved services. Geordin is often marked out as one of the names to watch in South African politics, and he is certain to be a key political actor for many years to come. We are very pleased to have him join us today. Geordin, thank you very much for joining us today. Presumably you're in the lovely Mother City, correct?
That's where I am, and the weather is fantastic. It's about 25 degrees Celsius. It's a great Mother City day.
Absolutely. But you guys haven't had any of the snow then that I've seen that the rest of SA has received. So not a beautiful snow-capped Table Mountain then.
No, definitely not. No, it's very, very rare to get snow in Cape Town. We have great kind of Mediterranean weather. It does get a bit wet from time to time in the winter, but at the moment it's wonderful.
Well, let's jump right into it. I know your time is very tight. You are 38 years old, mayor of one of the world's great cities, a senior member of the country's official opposition Democratic Alliance, and respected in a pretty highly polarized political landscape for the work you've done leading Cape Town. Tell us how you got here, your professional path and your journey to sitting, at the very senior most echelons of power in South Africa.
Well, thank you very much. That's a very kind introduction, and it is really great to join you. So, I mean, I got involved in politics in high school already. I was very interested in public speaking and debating, and I had a history teacher and an English teacher. So many of our stories start with great teachers who took a good interest in you, right? And my English teacher gave me a book called "Cry the Beloved Country" by Alan Paton, which I really recommend to listeners. It's an absolutely wonderful book, and in my case, actually quite life-changing. And I got very, very interested in politics. It was also a fascinating time in South Africa in the early 2000s when I was at school. It was in the middle of the presidency of Thabo Mbeki. Nelson Mandela had retired. And so South Africa was kind of going through a post-Mandela transition. It was a fascinating time. Then I went to varsity, and I was very surprised when I got to varsity, genuinely surprised, that there was only one political voice on campus. There was only the voice of the ANC Youth League on campus. There was no other voice. And we had this, the party that by that stage I was a member of, had this long, proud tradition of liberal politics in South Africa, had opposed apartheid, born in opposition to apartheid, and was not represented anywhere on campuses. It was very strange. So I started a student movement, a student organization, to essentially represent the liberal student voice, political voice on campus, and had enormous fun growing it from then. It was really kind of like a little startup. And I was massively overconfident and thought at our first meeting that there would be hundreds of people. There were about 12 people at our first meeting, and had to build it, through old school political organization from then. Fast forward a couple of years, I had worked as a chief of staff after varsity, I worked as a chief of staff to the then party leader, had done some economics research and speech writing and so on. And I ran for office at a very young age, more really as a kind of cheeky experiment to see what it was like to run for office.
So this is around 2010 or so, or
2011, exactly. Yeah,
2011, exactly. Right.
Yeah. And ended up getting elected. Then spent quite a long time in the national legislature. It's called Parliament in South Africa. And I loved being a member of Parliament. Mainly did economics jobs and finance jobs. Shadowing the government on finance and economics portfolios, but had this kind of growing frustration that I wasn't really making enough of a impact, enough of a positive difference. And really, around the time of COVID, determined that I had to either get out of politics and do something completely different, or I had to find a way to make much more positive impact in politics. And so I decided I thought about it for a long time, but eventually decided I'm going to run to be the mayor of Cape Town, which at the time was totally left field. Very few people in Cape Town knew me. I had been the party spokesperson in finance, not a big kind of headline grabbing portfolio in Parliament. But it has just been an incredible journey. I've loved it.
I think your journey is probably not too dissimilar from a lot of politicians, young people who have the political bug bites them. And
That's right.
I think you say overconfidence, but I think you have to have overconfidence to do this, right? I mean, it's
especially
a job
when you're going to run for a job like mayor. Firstly, our party has a really tough internal, essentially a primary system. So I had to run against an incumbent mayor, which was rough and tumble. That's really the kind of blood sport of politics. And then you've got to win a general election in the city. It's a huge city, 5 million people. So that's a big deal. It's a very diverse city. You've got everything from the extremely wealthy to very, very poor. And you've really got to back yourself. That is absolutely essential to succeed in that level of electoral politics.
Tell us how to think about Cape Town. And I say that in the context of the broader South Africa. So often Cape Townians, and I've spent many, many visits to Cape Town, and I truly adore the city. It's hard not to. But so often Cape Townians often speak of the city as existing almost apart from a South Africa that they perceive as endemic official corruption, crumbling infrastructure, feckless bureaucrats. And I think there's some truth to that. But surely you can't separate Cape Town from the broader South African story. So tell us how to think about Cape Town in the broader sense of it as the second city of South Africa.
Yeah. Well, you absolutely can't separate it because, South Africa Cape Town is absolutely an essential interwoven part of the South African story. Start at the beginning. Cape Town, for those who haven't been here, is, I just have to say, the coolest city. It is just a brilliant place. It has this fascinating history. So European settlers arrive in the middle of the 17th century. They try and set up a refreshment station here for essentially, they had no interest in building a city. It was just a place for ships to resupply on the way, on the trip between India and Europe. And they immediately run into a conflict with local Khoi and San tribes who live in this space. And essentially, that is the birth of Cape Town, because this is where they landed. And they built a little farming establishment here and started to expand inward from then. Almost immediately, and again in the latter part of the 17th and 18th century, they brought a huge number of enslaved people here from various Dutch colonies around the world, from Malaysia, from Indonesia, from Madagascar. The consequence of that is that you still have this amazing cultural and ethnic diversity in Cape Town. It is by far and away the most diverse place in South Africa from that perspective. You have these incredible culinary cultures and traditions. You have this new language being born, which is a truly wonderful and globally unique language called Afrikaans. It's this kind of amalgam of all these different languages that come here, basically with an underpinning, a foundation of Dutch, but then a lot of local stuff built on top of that. And Afrikaans, grows up out of the streets of Cape Town, and then come to the 19th and 20th century, and you get this fascinating political history in resistance, where there was this very strong association with the ANC because obviously Nelson Mandela was imprisoned on Robben Island for 27 years. A very strong resistance movement in Cape Town under the leadership of people like Desmond Tutu, the late Archbishop. So it has this incredible 20th century political resistance history. And then, of course, add on top of that, you just have this place of breathtaking natural beauty. If we just fast forward to the 21st century, to present day, It is a city that exists in a whole lot of different worlds at the same time. It's a favorite of nature lovers around the world. It is a playground of the ultra rich around the world. So it attracts the ultra wealthy. It also is very much part of the same challenges that South Africa is facing. It has uh, a huge unemployment and poverty. It has a high crime rate in those poorer communities. It has this great inequality. All of those things make it really the most fascinating place to live and work and try to make a positive difference.
Any visitor who comes to take Cape Town arrives at a world-class airport, then has the exposure to the Cape Flats
Yeah.
as they drive into the city, which are, as you put it, the impoverished outskirts of the original Cape Town. But then you have this beautiful city center. It really is a bit jarring. But
Yes.
you put your finger on it when you mentioned there sort of the playground of the ultra rich. How would you respond to the criticism that Cape Town has inbuilt advantages like a largish tax base, very sizable tourist flows that cities like, say, Durban, Port Elizabeth don't have?
Yes, I think the natural beauty is a built-in advantage, of course. But the lesson of success in government and politics is building on your built-in advantages and making the most of them. So yes, it is definitely an advantage that we are such a popular tourist destination. But I think we've taken those advantages and tried to build a really much more inclusive, better city where people can have the expectation of a better chance at life.
I think it was just maybe this week that some of the latest local government audits came out in South Africa. And Cape Town received I think the only clean audit, right, of a
Yes.
metropolitan. What differentiates from a governance standpoint Cape Town from the other large metropolitan areas?
Cape Town is the only city in South Africa that gets a clean audit, and that's because we do set high standards. We unashamedly want to stand for excellence in the public sector. There's a huge amount of, shall we say, the opposite of excellence, mediocrity in the public sector in South Africa. Lots of lack of trust and corruption. And we want to be unashamedly different. We want to say it is possible to act with integrity in the expenditure of public money and build public trust in the state, not break it down, and set high standards. And so we set out to do that. And we've over time built a culture of high standards in government where it doesn't mean that poverty and unemployment disappears. It does mean that you can make better progress in dealing with it and trying to overcome it and trying to lift more people out of it. Because good, ethical government founded on integrity is the building block. It is the starting point of everything else that comes on top of that. You cannot have better living conditions and more investment in poorer communities unless you first have ethical, honest government. So we've worked on that hard.
So when you think about Cape Town and the challenges it faces, which you certainly are not hiding from, is there one overarching issue or looming difficulty that you think could upset the whole good news story of it being a city on the move?
Well, I think South Africa has unacceptable levels of crime, and Cape Town is among the highest in South Africa. So that is clearly the number one issue is public safety. And it's made all the more difficult because mayors in South Africa, unfortunately, don't control all of the levers to actually do something about crime. In South Africa, unlike my understanding of how American cities work, unlike where mayors and cities have got local police control, South Africa has one single unitary national police force, and cities do very, very limited traffic enforcement and municipal bylaw enforcement. So we don't have the levers to pull. So what we've had to try to do, because the national police force is extremely under-resourced and under tremendous strain nationally in South Africa, we've had to try to expand, essentially drive a bus through the definition of traffic enforcement and bylaw enforcement.
A very
And
expansive
expand
definition. Yeah.
yeah, we've taken the most expansive definition possible, and actually we keep trying to move it out slightly further, and very deliberately try to insert ourselves into the crime fighting space with the resources that we have, even as little as those resources are at a city level. But yes, if there's one thing that could, I read case studies of how, I think it's the city of Acapulco. I might be wrong on this now, but I've read case studies of how Mexican tourist hubs have gone very quiet because the Mexican government just couldn't get a handle on crime. In my mind, that is the unacceptable scenario. We have to get a handle on that and make sure that the city is safer for everyone, not just those visitors, but everyone who lives here. I think this is a relatively common feature of cities around the world that have got street gangs and drug gangs. We have this incredible unequal distribution of criminal activity in the city, where just 10 precincts, 10 police precincts are responsible for more than half of all violent crime. That is an extraordinary concentration of crime in poorer communities. It's also, in a sense, an opportunity if you're dealing with, if you only have few resources, to focus those resources. And that is exactly what we are trying to do.
Right. Flood the zone, so to speak, right? To
Flood
use
the
the
zone,
cliche of the
exactly.
day. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, okay. Flip that question then. What do you want Cape Town to look like in 2050? Presumably, you don't want to be talking about 10 districts that are inundated with crime. What is the
Yeah.
city's vision for what it wants to be in 2050? Still a city of primarily tourism dollars, or more built off the back of tech and AI? What's your vision for the city?
Cape Town is a beautiful city that has tremendous natural assets, and I would love to see tourism 3 or 4 or 5x what it is today by 2050. So many more tourism dollars, and many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands more people employed in the tourism industry, because it is such a wonderful industry to be employed in. So definitely we must grow tourism, and we must grow other things as well. But what I'd really like to see, if you ask me for one thing, I'd like to see many more people out of informal settlements and informal homes, out of what we call tin shacks, and into some kind of more dignified and formal accommodation. And of course, that's a tough thing if it's only the city of Cape Town doing it, which is why we need South Africa to succeed as well. We see part of our project as very much part of the South African project, because so long as you have only one place succeeding, you're just going to get more and more and more very poor people coming to the city in search of better opportunities. And then you'll never get ahead of the informality curve. So really what I hope to see in 2050 is far fewer people living in informality, a much more formalized and inclusive and more dignified, that outer kind of periphery of the city that you spoke about, and hopefully a much more successful South Africa as well, where people come to the city with in search of a job. There's nothing wrong with that, but also with disposable income and the wherewithal to get into formal accommodation.
Those are very worthy objectives. And I'm sure you know the statistic off the top of your head, the number of internal migrants to Cape Town every week,
Yeah.
right? It's a fairly sizable number coming from Eastern
Oh,
Cape and such. Do you feel that sort of accommodating these people in like you say, not 10 shacks, in formal accommodation, is there a path to do that you feel comfortable on?
I actually think for the first time that we may have a workable path to victory, and I'm very excited about this. Certainly what is not the path, and I think we have to be honest about this in South Africa. What is not the path is free state-provided housing, because the state simply does not have the resources in South Africa to do that. It just to provide for Cape Town's housing backlog would cost 130 billion rand. I'm going to have to very quickly convert that into dollars, but that's 20, let's say 20 billion dollars, something like that. So that is not going to be feasible. So what we have to do is figure out a way to crowd in private investment to provide for that accommodation. And the way that we can do that is through township entrepreneurs and micro developers that actually are ready to fill that market failure, that gap, where people actually do have work. They might be on minimum wage jobs, but they can't find anything in the formal market to rent or buy. And so we're working right now to unlock some legislative reform and regulatory reform at a city level that's going to hugely empower those micro developers, those township entrepreneurs, to step into that market gap and provide that supply. And to be honest with you, I really think this is what what gets me so excited about this. This is the only workable plan that I have yet seen in South Africa for dealing with informality. If you ask any government official in South Africa, what's the plan to deal with informality in Johannesburg, in Soweto, in Durban, wherever, they'll tell you it's government housing. And I can tell you that that is simply not true. What is true is that this is the best chance we've got by enabling small and often young entrepreneurs to deliver this supply in the affordable market themselves.
The size of the problem is such that it's going to require some sort of novel solution. Right.
Mm,
And I think the idea of just, another round of RDP, so to speak, housing,
that's
the
right.
early post-apartheid housing is probably not going to be a sustainable solution. I invited you on today not to get into the cut and thrust of daily South African politics. I'm sure you have an interview on Radio 702 or something later when you can talk about the
Yes.
intricacies of the DA or the National Unity Government. But I am thinking of our listeners who don't follow South Africa on a daily basis. Give them a sense of what the Democratic Alliance, or the DA, the official opposition, stands for rather than simply against. And what is your answer to the criticism that's so often cast at the DA that it is simply too white for a party in a country that is 92% non-white?
The DA has its history in liberal opposition to apartheid, as I've described earlier. It was born in 1959 when the then parliamentary opposition to apartheid, the United Party, was not offering any muscular opposition anymore. It had kind of been co-opted. And there was a small group of rebels that said, we've got to have muscular opposition, and they broke away. And when I say liberal, I mean liberal kind of in the European sense. We are concerned with expanding individual liberty. We see the individual as the kind of touchstone of value and analysis in society, and that the role of government, there is definitely a clear role for government, but the role for government should be to try and remove the impediments that stand in the way of each person accessing and benefiting from the opportunities that society offers, and should not add new impediments to them. So we think that that is the way that South Africa is going to succeed in the future, that the way that it has been governed for the last really 100 years has been basically the same. It was a governing model of Afrikaner and white nationalism under apartheid, which controlled the economy, which tried to put impediments in the way of people accessing opportunity based on their race. Then that was replaced in 1994. And what the ANC has basically built over the last 30 years is a government based on Black African nationalism, and has pursued a very, very similar model of government. Of course, there are many aspects in which South Africa is indescribably better. It is a free democracy. It has a wonderful constitution. It has a free judiciary and free press. But their style of government and their policy in government has basically been remarkably similar. And so we think that the only way that South Africa succeeds in the future is through the values and approach to government that we bring, which makes prime the values of integrity, of honesty in public life, in the use of public money, in removing obstacles from people accessing opportunity, and so on. So that's what I think that's what the history of the DA is about and what we stand for. In terms of the criticism that you raise, I mean, of course, there is some validity to the idea that over the last 30 years, over the last 50 years, our support base has been first mainly uh, white South Africans who were opposed to apartheid, and then after the end of apartheid, slowly but surely consolidated all minority support, what we call in South Africa colored voters and Indian voters, or South Africans of Indian descent. The consolidated all of that minority support behind the DA. And we have been very, very dominant in that space. And we have slowly but surely started to win the confidence and support of more and more Black South Africans. And that really is a growing momentum over time. I don't think it's possible for it to happen quickly. there's still every single issue in South African politics is always seen through the lens of race, given our history. But if you look at election results where we are winning in more places more often, it's not possible to do that in South Africa with only minority support. These minorities are very small percentages of the overall population. So the fact that we are winning in more places more of the time demonstrates that we are succeeding in slowly but surely winning the confidence and trust of more and more Black South Africans. And I think that is a trend that will grow. And I think it's a trend that obviously the ANC is also helping to accelerate by through their own actions.
I think probably the point earlier about the effectiveness of governance in Cape Town is that your average South African voter, no matter their race, I presume that they are equally attuned to issues of delivery as opposed to just voting along
Correct.
racial lines, right? They are a sophisticated voter class, right? That is not
Yeah.
one issue, generally speaking. If that's a correct assessment, right?
That is correct. And I think more and more South Africans are starting to think like that, especially as governance has taken a beating in the rest of South Africa. And a number of basic services and basic state functions have started to really show signs of severe distress and even collapse. More and more voters are saying, no matter how thankful and grateful we are to the ANC for the role that they played during apartheid, the fact of the matter is this is really going in the wrong direction. And I want my basic services to work. I want my kid to have a decent school. I want them to have a better future than I have, or than I have at present. So I think that more and more voters are starting to feel pragmatic like that.
Well, you can tell I'm very captivated by the issue, not the political to and fro, but the governance
Mm.
piece. And one thing that's always concerned me about South Africa, and I think you could say this for many countries, but South Africa in particular, is that when you talk to the proverbial bright young things coming out of local universities with a good degree in hand, and you ask them about bringing their skills into government, why don't you go work for the Ministry of Finance or the Ministry of Transport or ESCOM? They almost universally say absolutely not. They don't see a
Yes.
career in government as something to aspire to. And I think it's hard to argue with the fact that without their worldview and knowledge and vigor, that the South African government, no matter what party that sits in power, is going to be unable to fundamentally beat back these existential issues, right?
Mm.
So how do you
Correct.
encourage the ANC, any of the parties in the South African political system? How do you encourage young people to see government as a path, as an admirable path, as opposed to somewhere that only the feckless bureaucrats go or the corrupt go? How do you do that?
That's such a great question. I've literally just come out of a talk that I've given in the room next door, where I'm talking to a group of senior government leaders about exactly this question, exactly that. I spend a lot of time thinking about this in Cape Town because I want Cape Town to be a cool place to work for young South Africans. I want it to be an attractive place to work, where people think about starting a great and rewarding career in Cape Town, in the city of Cape Town, and more broadly in the public service in South Africa. I think a couple of things have critically undermined it. Obviously, corruption and state capture. That has given the public service a bad rap in South Africa, where people think if you are a young, clever professional, you think you want to make a positive difference. There's no way that I can make a positive difference in the state because it's all about which politician is in charge, who's getting favors, who's friends with whom. It's not about value add and excellence. We have to actively change that perception that this is a place founded on excellence, and we are trying to set ever higher standards and trying to achieve ever bigger and more important things. And I spend a lot of time in Cape Town talking about how we're trying to do that in the city and try to get that culture to permeate through the organization, that we absolutely protect the professionalism of the state and the civil service, and that we want to set the highest standards, and that we want to be an attractive place to work. I think the other thing that has critically undermined it, and which we must stop in South Africa, is this concept of cadre deployment, which I think I must briefly explain for international listeners. The idea when the ANC took over in 1994 that they had to replace a state that was in a civil service that was entirely loyal to the old undemocratic regime, and they had to replace it with a new civil service loyal to a democratic regime. I think very few people would argue necessarily with the obvious logic of that. But what it very quickly morphed into was actually stacking government jobs with people loyal to whoever the politician in charge is at the moment, whoever the minister is, or whoever the elected official is, instead of loyal to the Constitution and loyal to the idea of taking our country forward, loyal to the idea of building on on what has been left behind and making it better for everyone. And so we have had, unfortunately, a very politicized civil service. We have to stop that. And so one of the things I do is stand up against that in Cape Town. And we will not have a politicized civil service. We'll have a truly professional civil service that values excellence and achievement and value add.
I think maybe the answer to my own question, right, is that you can't boil the ocean, to use the cliche, right? So you have to have centers of excellence, urban centers of excellence, provincial centers of excellence that can serve as a model for young people, right? That, okay,
Correct.
I want to join that government because I've seen it delivered, a better road or a better primary school. There's a question I didn't want to have to ask, but I think I have to, right? We have a lot of listeners in the US, and others who are, South Africa to them is a headline they see every so often. I think I see you smiling. I think you know the question, but
Thanks.
I think it's fair to say that both of us are probably very disappointed about the rhetoric about South Africans in the global media,
Yes.
particularly the US of late, right? From your perspective, as a white South African serving in the official opposition, but serving in a senior government position, and you hear these claims of a purported white genocide or simply mistreatment of a white minority, give us your perspective as a white South African serving in government, a proud South African for 38 years. Give us your lens beyond just the headlines from what we saw in the Oval Office a few weeks ago.
I mean, it's a ludicrous statement. It is clearly an exercise. It's either itself an exercise in misinformation, or it is a president that has been spending too much time on Google or Facebook and is now a victim of misinformation. There's absolutely no such thing happening in South Africa. It is a ludicrous suggestion. And potentially, I know I'm smiling, but it's potentially very harmful to South Africa.
Indeed,
So
indeed.
it should not be propagated or perpetuated by any serious person. South Africa has got a terrible crime problem, a terrible violent crime problem. And we in Cape Town are working day and night to address that crime problem. But overwhelmingly, the victims of crime in South Africa are Black South Africans. Overwhelmingly, the victims of crime in Cape Town are Black South Africans. It's just a complete misanalysis of the problem. And so I think it is important to correct that. I'm actually glad for the opportunity. There are many white South Africans who feel like they're not getting a fair shot in South Africa. And I understand that emotional impulse because we've had this really terrible re-racialization of all public policy, where we had this idea that South Africa was going to move towards being a non-racial state. And there was a need for certainly for some interventionist action, some government action. There is absolutely a role for the states to try and help particularly very poor and overwhelmingly poor Black children to get a better shot at life. The state has a role to play in doing that. But what we've had is actually this where every sphere of the state, in every aspect of public policy, is actually boiling back down to kind of very narrow and nasty racial quotas. And that is, I think, a thing that upsets a lot of us and alarms white South Africans and makes them feel very vulnerable, as if they are not full partners in this mission of building a successful democratic South Africa. So that's where the emotional impulse comes from. And I have a lot of sympathy with that. We should be moving ever more close to a non-racial South Africa. We should be trying to strip out racial profiling and racial categorization from public policy. We should be looking at ways to remove the obstacles that young Black children face in our country by focusing on education, by focusing on things that aren't determined by their race or by the race of other people. But that is not the direction of travel. It's actually the other direction. So there's a lot of political debate and argument about that. But that is where the emotional impulse comes from. But to take that and spin that out into a message that there's a kind of wholesale a program of violent victimization of a certain racial category is just completely misinformation. There's no other way to describe it.
Right. As we close out, a couple questions that, just to give you perspective a little bit more about sort of what drives you as a politician and a public administrator. Who do you look to for inspiration and why? A figure that provides a model for you. And my only restriction on that answer is that no South African can say Nelson Mandela, because I think that's embedded in there, right? That's a natural answer for every South African. But who do you, as a politician and as a mayor, look to for inspiration?
Well, that is a good question. Look, I think we quite impacted on who we grew up watching. So I grew up in the time of the Clinton presidency and the prime ministership of Tony Blair in Britain. And for similar reasons, I was always incredibly impressed with them as political leaders and as communicators, people who could communicate a very clear vision for what they were trying to achieve for America and Britain. Obviously,
right. And the
in their own
ultimate
ways,
retail politicians, right? I mean, they knew how to carry the message.
but in a really impressive way. I mean, before the Labour Party in Britain was utterly unelectable, it would have been condemned to a generation of irrelevancy. And Tony Blair was able to pick it up, make it electable again. Something the Democratic Party needs to do right now. It needs a kind of Tony Blair leadership figure right now, because it is unfortunately consigning itself to irrelevancy. So that really impressed me. Then later on, I had the enormous privilege of working for Helen Zille in South Africa as her chief of staff and in various other staff positions in her operation. And she is an enormously impressive and gifted politician with incredible moral clarity of thought, and an absolute backbone and integrity. I loved working for her and learned an enormous amount about politics. I think those probably have been the most influential people. And then I hope he doesn't get a bad rap now, but I was a massive fan of Barack Obama. I thought that he was just an exceptional president of America, an exceptional thinker, a beautiful writer, and will remain a huge fan of his. And
A
but it's
true kind
amazing.
of philosopher statesman, right?
It's amazing how many people do argue with it and seem to prefer the kind of shallow soundbite analysis we get now.
Indeed. Well, last question. I always ask our guests to recommend 1 to 2 books to better understand their focus areas. You've already given us Alan Payton's wonderful Cry the Beloved
Yes.
Country, which is
Please
actually
read it,
behind
yeah.
me here over my shoulder. A quick read and a deeply impactful read. But what else? 1 to 2 other titles that would help us understand either Cape Town, South Africa, the issue of good governance, what should be on our nightstand?
Okay, so let me offer a couple. I think if you want a wonderful introduction to liberal politics in South Africa, you should read Cricket in the Thorn Tree. I'm sure you've read it. The biography of Helen Suzman, wonderful political leader in South Africa's history, and someone who deserves more global acclaim. Then I loved the Rian Malan book, My Traitor's Heart. Have you read that?
Yes, I have. It's timeless book.
So Rian Malan, My Traitor's Heart, also basically a life-changing book for me. I read it as a teenager and reread it a couple of years ago, and it was just as good. And then I offered one more, probably Tony Leon's autobiography or memoir called On the Contrary.
And that's the original memoir, right? Because I know he
Yes.
has a new book out now, right? But this is the one that came out 20 odd years ago, right? Yeah.
I'm talking about the original memoir. It's a dense read. I can't remember how long it is, but it's a long read. But it is a kind of encyclopedic a journey through liberal politics, through the ANC, through what's gone wrong in South Africa since the end of Mandela's presidency. It's a great read.
We've got Alan Payton, Helen Suzman, Rian Milan, and Tony Leon, some icons of South African politics and writing. And we will put those into the show notes, of course. Geordin, thank you so much for taking time on a Friday. I know your schedule is jam-packed, and I truly appreciate you giving us your thoughts, and I appreciate your openness and your candor.
Thank you very much. It's been a great conversation.